Sign it, Your Honor. The words didn't land like a request. They landed like a shove. In Department 12 of the San Francisco Superior Court, the air felt too thin for so many people to breathe at once. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the press waited outside like wolves in tailored coats, their phones already warmed up, their headlines half-written. Rain tapped the tall windows in a steady, patient rhythm, soft at first, then sharper, like fingers drumming on glass. Somewhere in the ceiling, a vent hummed. Somewhere in the room, someone's pen clicked once, twice, then stopped. At the petitioner's table, Damian Cross sat with the calm posture of a man who had never been told no and believed the world had signed a contract to keep it that way. He wore a charcoal suit that looked expensive without screaming about it. His hair was perfect in that effortless way that wasn't effortless at all. He didn't look at the judge as if the judge held power over him. He looked at the judge as if the judge was simply another executive who needed the right slide deck. To Damian's right, Gideon Blackwood leaned forward, a shark who didn't need to swim fast to be feared. Gideon's voice was smooth, controlled, polished like a courtroom floor after hours. "Your Honor, we've provided all required documentation," he said, tapping a neat stack of papers. "My client has offered a generous settlement, $5 million to Mrs. Cross, far beyond what the law would require given her lack of contribution to the company's success." At those words, the room shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically. It was the kind of movement that happened under skin. Lack of contribution. At the other table, Dr. Iris Kane, still legally Iris Cross for the moment, sat very still. If you looked quickly, you might mistake her stillness for defeat. But stillness wasn't always surrender. Sometimes it was the way a storm gathered itself before deciding where to strike. Iris's hands rested near a thin, sealed envelope. Cream-colored. No logo, no flourish. It looked too plain to matter. Her face held no makeup designed for the cameras outside. No performance, only a quiet focus that made her eyes look darker than they were. Behind her, her attorney, an older woman with silver hair and a careful gaze, shifted a legal pad, whispering something Iris didn't respond to. Across the aisle, Celeste Devereaux sat in the front row, legs crossed, hands folded, every inch of her posture claiming ownership of the room. Celeste was Astra-Veron Systems' chief operating officer. She was also the woman Damian had stopped hiding. Her lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. And then Damian did it. He turned his head slightly, just enough to look at Iris as if she were an object he had grown tired of dusting. When he spoke, his voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "I built Astra-Veron from nothing," he said, clearly, evenly. "Iris, she's a good person, but she's not a builder. She was support. She liked the life. She liked the house. She liked the dinners." Meh. He let the last word hover a fraction longer than necessary. Then he added almost kindly, "$5 million is more than fair." The judge, Honorable Marianne Klein, didn't react the way Damian expected. Judge Klein had seen men like him before. Different names, same entitlement, same confidence that money was a universal translator. She glanced down at her file. "Mrs. Cross," she said, "do you understand the terms of the settlement as offered?" Iris didn't speak immediately. Rain ticked the window again. In the silence, you could almost hear the invisible counter that lived inside Damian's impatience. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Gideon's expression tightened by half a millimeter. Celeste's smile sharpened. Finally, Iris looked up. Her voice, when it came, was calm, not fragile, not emotional, measured. "I understand what they want," she said. "I also understand what they forgot." Gideon's eyebrows rose just slightly. Judge Klein's gaze narrowed. "What do you mean, Mrs. Cross?" Iris slid the envelope forward, across the polished wood toward her attorney. A small motion. A quiet motion. But the room reacted to it like a match had been struck. Her attorney opened the envelope and pulled out a document. Aged at the edges, The ink slightly faded in places. A contract. "Your Honor," Iris's attorney said carefully, "we would like to enter Exhibit A into the record. A prenuptial agreement signed by Mr. Cross 12 years ago." Damien's face remained smooth for a moment. Then his eyes flickered, just once, to the paper, like a man recognizing a weapon he'd mistaken for decoration. Gideon reached for it, too quickly for someone who wasn't worried. "That's irrelevant," Gideon said. "The prenup was superseded by—" "It wasn't," Iris said. Her voice didn't rise, it didn't shake, it simply arrived. "Because he never filed the amendment," she continued. "He never read past the signature page. He never noticed the licensing clause." Judge Klein's posture changed. "Licensing clause?" she repeated. Iris's gaze held steady, like a lens focusing. "The core algorithm Astravaren is built on," Iris said, "is not owned by Astravaren." Damien laughed softly, one short, disbelieving sound. "That's absurd," he said, the charm slipping at the edges. She's trying to—" But Iris didn't look at him. She looked at the judge. "It's mine," she said. Rain struck the window harder, as if the sky leaned closer to listen. "It's called Project Hydra," Iris continued. "And the prenup states Astravaren only licenses it for the duration of our marriage." The room went so still it felt like the oxygen had been removed. Judge Klein's eyes dropped to the contract. "Dr. Kane," she said slowly, "are you stating that in the event of divorce, the company loses rights to use its core technology?" Iris's answer was immediate. "Yes." Gideon opened his mouth, then closed it. Damien's hand tightened around his pen until his knuckles whitened. Celeste's smile vanished. And somewhere, far from the courtroom, far from the rain, an email notification chimed in a corporate office, crisp and cheerful. Subject line: license termination. Project Hydra. Pending. Because what Damien Cross didn't understand yet was that the day he tried to erase Iris with $5 million was the day his $14 billion empire began to die. And to understand why, we have to go back. Back before the suits, before the cameras, before Astravaren had a name anyone respected. Back to a year when Damien Cross wasn't a king. Just a man with a borrowed crown and a desperate hunger to be seen. In 2008, San Francisco smelled like coffee and ambition and panic. The world was wobbling, markets collapsing, careers evaporating, people realizing safe had been an illusion all along. But certain places didn't slow down. Certain rooms stayed bright. Certain minds kept racing. Iris Kane lived in one of those rooms. It was a graduate lab at a university near the city. Fluorescent light, whiteboards crowded with equations, laptops humming like small engines. Stacks of research papers rose from desks like unstable towers. Iris was 26, sharp-eyed and exhausted in the way only brilliant people became exhausted, because her brain never truly shut off. Her work was computational linguistics, but it wasn't the kind of work people understood in casual conversation. It wasn't teach a computer grammar. It was teach a system to interpret meaning, context, ambiguity. How a word changed when it sat next to another word. How human language carried intention the way a glass carried water, sometimes clear, sometimes poisoned. Iris didn't chase money. She chased truth, and that made her dangerous in a world that ran on story. Damien Cross, back then, ran on story like it was oxygen. At 28, Damien was already practiced at looking like he belonged in places he hadn't earned. He had dropped out of a computer science program and replaced competence with charisma. He carried debt like a second spine. Credit cards. A private loan from a friend he no longer returned calls from. Rent behind by 2 months. His laptop was held together by tape. But he wore confidence the way other people wore perfume, heavy enough to be noticed. He told everyone he was building something. He always said it like the building was already there, shimmering just behind the air, and all anyone had to do was believe. That was how he got into a research symposium he hadn't been invited to. He volunteered. Or rather, he claimed he volunteered. A name tag and a clipboard were enough to let him slip through the doors. Inside, he moved like a man doing reconnaissance. Eyes scanning, ears catching keywords, machine learning, semantic model, core framework, scalable. He didn't understand most of it, but he understood the one thing that mattered. Everyone in that room wanted the same thing, a bridge from research to reality, a way to make their work matter outside the lab. Damien heard the hunger in their voices, and he knew how to sell hunger back to people as hope. Then he saw Iris. She wasn't the loudest speaker. She wasn't the one waving her arms and performing confidence. She spoke quietly, with precision. But as she explained her model, how it could parse language patterns in real time, adapt to new inputs, learn without collapsing into nonsense, people leaned forward without realizing they were leaning. Damien watched the room. He didn't watch Iris. Not yet. He watched the way the room responded to her. That was the first thing Damien truly understood about Iris Kane. She had something real. After her presentation, while others surrounded her with questions, Damien waited. He was patient when patience served him. When the crowd thinned, he approached like a man who had been there all along. "Dr. Kane," he said, offering a hand as if introductions were formalities reserved for equals. "Damien Cross." She hesitated a fraction, then shook his hand. His grip was confident. His eyes were bright. His smile was curated. She began. "I know who you are," Damien cut in gently. "I read your abstract last week." That was a lie, but it was a lie wrapped in respect, and respect was a currency Iris was rarely offered in a world that underestimated quiet women. Her shoulders softened, just slightly. "And?" she asked. Damien tilted his head as if considering the best way to say something true without sounding like he wanted anything. "Your work," he said, "is the kind of thing that can change everything. But it's trapped." "Trapped," Iris repeated, wary. "In academia," Damien said smoothly. "In grants. In committees. In waiting for permission. You deserve scale. You deserve impact." Iris studied him. People had told her versions of this before, usually right before they asked for something. "What do you do, Mr. Cross?" she asked. He didn't flinch at the title. He liked it. "I build companies," he said. Another lie. Or at least, a lie in advance. He leaned closer, lowering his voice like he was letting her into a secret. "I'm putting together a team," he continued. "Researchers who want their work to live in the world. Investors are still cautious because of the economy, but innovation doesn't stop for recessions. It just changes hands." Iris's mouth tightened. "You're recruiting," she said. "I'm offering," Damien corrected softly. "A partnership." She almost laughed. Partnership. He didn't look like the men who usually said that word. He looked hungry. But he also looked certain. And certainty, when you're tired, can feel like safety. "What kind of partnership?" Iris asked. Damien's smile widened. "The kind where you build the engine," he said, "and I build the road." It was the first time he framed her genius as central. Not auxiliary, not supportive, central. And Iris, who had spent years watching men take credit with casual ease, felt something inside her shift. Not because she trusted Damien, not completely, but because she was tired of waiting for a world that respected work only after it made money. She wanted her work to matter, to save people, to do something more than sit in a journal with a citation count. Damien sensed her hesitation like a predator sensing movement. He added one more thing, gentle as an oath. "If we do this," he said, "your work stays yours. I don't want to take it from you. Iris's eyes narrowed. Then why would you invest? Damien spread his hands. Because I want to build something that lasts, he said. And because I'm tired of watching real genius stay locked behind university walls. It was almost believable. Almost. And then he said the line that would become the hinge of her life. Let me help you take it into the world, Damien said, and I'll make sure you're protected. Protected. The word landed differently than partnership. It sounded like recognition, like care, like someone finally seeing what she carried and understanding its weight. Iris didn't say yes that night, but she didn't say no. And Damien, leaving the symposium, stepped into the rain and smiled into the dark like a man who had just found his way out of debt, not by working harder, but by attaching himself to someone who could. The first office wasn't an office. It was a rented room above a closed-down print shop where the carpet smelled faintly of old ink and stale heat. Damien called it a startup headquarters. Iris called it a place with Wi-Fi. They bought second-hand desks off Craigslist. They drank coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. They worked late because that was what you did when you believed you were building the future. Iris built. Damien sold. At first, it felt balanced. Damien really could talk. He could walk into a room with investors and make them feel like they were already missing out. He could sketch a vision in the air, broad and bright, like a mural painted over uncertainty. And Iris, who hated small talk and loved systems, could sit at her laptop and turn language into architecture. She began designing what she called a semantic engine, a model that could interpret not just words, but intent. How a phrase could mean one thing in a medical context and another in a legal one. How a single term could shift depending on who spoke it. She named the core framework Project Hydra, a mythological creature with many heads. Cut one off, another grows. A system designed to adapt, to survive, to scale. Damien loved the name because it sounded powerful, because it sounded like a headline. He never asked what it cost Iris to build it. He never saw the nights when her eyes burned from staring at code. The migraines, the notebooks filled with handwritten patterns, the way her fingers trembled after hours of debugging a problem no one else could even understand. Damien only saw the result. Something real. Something monetizable. Something that could make him famous. And slowly, so slowly, Iris didn't notice until it was already the shape of their life, Damien began rewriting the story. It started with tiny things. A journalist interview where Damien said, "When I designed the underlying architecture," a keynote where he spoke about my algorithm, and Iris, sitting in the audience, told herself it was just shorthand. Then came the slide decks. Hydra became Astraveran's proprietary core. Damien's name appeared on patents Iris hadn't even been told were filed. When Iris confronted him late at night in the little office, Damien looked wounded, as if she'd insulted him rather than questioned him. "It's optics," he said. "Investors trust a face. They trust a founder. They need a story." "And the story is, I don't exist?" Iris asked. Damien stepped closer, hands gentle on her shoulders like he was calming a child. "You exist," he said softly. "To me. We're a team." A team. The word again. He was good at words, Damien was, but Iris was better at language than anyone. She could hear the manipulation hidden inside the comfort. Still, she stayed. Because Hydra was growing. Because the work mattered. Because Damien had gotten them meetings she couldn't have gotten on her own. And because Iris had one secret Damien didn't understand. She had protected herself. Not with anger, not with threats, with paper. It happened the year Damien proposed. By then, Astraveran Systems had a name, a few early contracts, a small team. Damien was suddenly a rising tech visionary, and the press loved him because he gave them a hero narrative in a recession-starved world. When Damien proposed, it wasn't just love, it was branding. He did it at a rooftop party, city lights behind him, friends cheering, cameras ready. Iris said yes because she did love him, some part of him at least, the part that had looked at her research and treated it like treasure. But Iris also said yes because she believed marriage might stabilize them, make him stop chasing validation like a drug. And then Iris's mentor, Professor Lillian Cho, a woman who had spent decades watching brilliant women become footnotes, pulled Iris aside. "Don't be foolish," Professor Cho said. Iris bristled. "I'm not—" "You're in love," the professor said, not unkindly. "That's not foolish, but assuming love replaces law is." She handed Iris a business card for an attorney. "Protect your work," Professor Cho said. "You can protect your marriage and your mind at the same time." Iris hesitated. Damien would hate it. Damien would say it meant she didn't trust him. But Iris didn't do it because she distrusted love. She did it because she understood human behavior. How people changed under pressure. How stories became weapons. So she met with a lawyer, a quiet, meticulous woman who asked Iris questions no one had asked before. "Who wrote the first line of code?" the attorney said. "I did," Iris answered. "Who owns the research?" the attorney asked. "I do," Iris said, and for the first time it sounded like an affirmation instead of a fear. They drafted a prenuptial agreement. Damien signed it quickly, too quickly. He was euphoric. He was busy. He wanted to get back to the party. He wanted to get back to being a man admired. He barely read the first page. He certainly didn't read the clause Iris insisted on adding. Project Hydra is the sole intellectual property of Dr. Iris Kane. Astraveron Systems shall receive a non-transferable license to use Project Hydra only for the duration of the marriage. Upon legal dissolution of marriage, the license terminates immediately. When Damien signed, Iris felt something in her chest loosen, not because she wanted to leave him, but because she had built a door, just in case she ever needed to walk out alive. For a while, the door stayed closed, for years, in fact. Astraveron exploded. Hydra powered their products, language systems for hospitals, predictive analytics for logistics, communication tools for emergency response. It became the engine beneath everything. Damien became a star. Magazine covers, talk shows, panels where he spoke about innovation, like he was speaking about destiny. And Iris? Iris became Damien Cross's brilliant wife, a phrase that sounded flattering until you heard it enough times to realize it was a cage. At dinners, people asked Damien about Hydra. Damien answered, smiling. Iris sat beside him and listened to her own work being described as if it had been pulled fully formed from Damien's mind. Sometimes Damien would squeeze her hand under the table, a silent reminder: behave, support, smile, team. Iris smiled because she didn't want to burn down what they'd built, and because some small part of her still hoped Damien would stop needing to be the hero. But hunger like Damien's doesn't fade. It grows. It demands more. And eventually, it demands a sacrifice. Her. Celeste Devereaux arrived like a blade wrapped in silk. Damien hired her when Astraveron hit the stage where chaos became expensive. Operations, scaling, efficiency. Celeste was brilliant in the way that didn't require warmth. She didn't charm rooms, she controlled them. She didn't ask questions, she delivered answers. And she looked at Iris the way Damien once had, recognizing value. Only Celeste's recognition wasn't admiration. It was calculation. At first, Iris tried to like her. Celeste was competent, focused, not threatened by Iris's intellect. But Iris began noticing patterns. The way Celeste stood too close to Damien in meetings. The way Damien's laughter sounded different around her. Less performative, more conspiratorial. The way Celeste called Damien late at night, and Damien always took the call. "Operational emergency," he'd say, already halfway out of bed. At first, Iris believed him, because believing was easier than admitting what her instincts were screaming. Then came the gala, Astraveron's annual charity event, All glass and light and soft music that existed to make rich people feel kind. Iris wore a simple black dress. Damien wore a tuxedo that made him look like a movie version of himself. They posed for photos, the perfect couple. Then Iris stepped away to speak with a researcher from a non-profit disaster response organization, people who actually used Astraveran's tools in the field. When Iris turned back, she saw Damien and Celeste in a corner near a marble pillar. Celeste's hand was on Damien's forearm. Damien's head was angled toward her, listening like her voice mattered more than the room. It wasn't the touch itself. It was the intimacy of it. The ease, the private world inside a public space. Iris felt her throat tighten. She approached, not to accuse, not to create a scene, just to confirm reality. But as she drew nearer, Celeste turned her head and met Iris's gaze. Celeste smiled, not politely, possessively. A moment later, Celeste stepped back as if nothing had happened, and Damien turned toward Iris with his public smile ready. "Hey," Damien said lightly. "You okay?" Iris looked at him, really looked. And for the first time in years, she saw not the man she married, but the man he'd always been trying to become. A man who wanted to be worshipped. A man who couldn't stand sharing credit or space or love unless he was the center. "I'm fine," Iris said, but something inside her clicked, like a lock turning, a door unlatching. After that, the marriage didn't fall apart in one dramatic crash. It eroded. Damien came home later. He looked at his phone more than he looked at her. He spoke about Astraveran like it was his true spouse. When Iris tried to discuss Hydra's future, new safeguards, ethical constraints, Damien waved her off. "You're overthinking," he said. "We need to move fast. We need to beat competitors." "It's not a race if people get hurt," Iris said. Damien sighed, the way people sigh when they believe they're dealing with someone inconvenient. "You're always so academic," he murmured. "Always so cautious." "And you're always so hungry," Iris replied before she could stop herself. Damien froze. A small thing. But Iris saw it. The way his face hardened, the way his eyes narrowed. He didn't like being seen. Not truly. 2 months later, Iris found a folder on his laptop. He'd left it open by mistake. A folder labeled Dissolution/Strategy. Inside were documents, draft settlement proposals, property division notes, and an email thread with Gideon Blackwood. The subject line, Minimize Exposure, Spousal Claims. Iris stared at the screen, the glow painting her fingers pale. Her heart didn't race. It slowed. That was the terrifying part. Because when your heart slows like that, it means something in you has decided this is war. The settlement offer was insulting. $5 million. As if 12 years of her life could be reduced to a check. As if Hydra, her mind, her labor, her sacrifice, wasn't the engine that made everything possible. When Iris confronted Damien, he didn't apologize. He didn't even pretend. "You'll be fine," he said. $5 million is generous." "Generous," Iris repeated. Damien's tone turned sharp. "Don't do this. Don't make this ugly." "I'm not the one making it ugly," Iris said, voice steady. "You're planning to erase me." Damien's jaw tightened. "You want to be remembered?" he snapped. "Fine. You can be remembered as the woman who tried to take down her husband out of spite." Iris blinked. So that was his strategy. Not legal, narrative. Make her look emotional, vindictive, a bitter ex-wife reaching for money she didn't earn. That's when Iris understood the real danger. Damien didn't just want a divorce. He wanted a public victory, a spectacle where he remained the hero and she became a cautionary tale. Then Celeste entered the story openly. Damien stopped pretending his late meetings were just work. Celeste began appearing at Damien's side at events Iris used to attend. She wore confidence like a crown. The message was clear. Iris was already replaced. The final humiliation came with the eviction notice. Not dramatic, not shouted, delivered by a private security firm while Iris was still legally married to Damien. "You can't do this," Iris said to the man at the door. He looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I'm just delivering." Damien appeared behind him, calm as ever. "You'll stay at a hotel," Damien said. "It's temporary." "It's my home," Iris said. Damien's eyes cooled. "It's my house." There it was. Ownership, control, the world as a thing to possess. Iris looked at him, then at Celeste standing behind him in the hallway, smiling faintly. Iris didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply nodded. "Okay," Iris said quietly. "We'll do it your way." Damien exhaled in relief, misunderstanding her surrender. He didn't see what Iris was doing. She was letting him walk toward the cliff at full speed, because the faster he ran, the harder he would fall. The divorce proceedings moved quickly, because Damien wanted them to. He wanted the narrative sealed before Iris could change it. Gideon Blackwood filed motions like bullets. He framed Iris as non-essential, non-contributing, a spouse who benefited from wealth she didn't create. In filings, he used phrases like supportive partner, domestic contribution, no direct corporate role. As if Iris's mind had never touched Astraveran at all. Iris's attorney, Mara Ellison, warned her. "They're going to provoke you," Mara said. "They want you to look unstable, emotional." Iris nodded. "I won't give them that." In preparation, Iris spent nights not crying but collecting. Old emails, early code repositories, time-stamped drafts, academic notes, research logs that showed the first heartbeat of Hydra long before Astraveran had money, long before Damien had fame. She didn't do it to prove she was right. She did it because she was done being erased. On the day of the hearing, rain fell like the sky had its own opinion about men like Damien. In court, Gideon performed. That was what he did best. He spoke of Damien's vision, of Damien's genius. He painted Iris as a passenger in a vehicle she hadn't built. Then Damien took the stand, and he said it out loud. "She's a trophy wife," Damien said, voice smooth. "Not an engineer, not a creator. She didn't build Astraveran, I did." The words were meant to humiliate, to shrink her, to make her feel small in front of the judge, the court clerk, the stenographer, the strangers sitting behind her. Celeste watched from the front row with the expression of someone savoring a meal. Judge Klein listened, face unreadable. Then the judge turned to Iris. "Dr. Kane," she asked, "do you wish to respond?" Iris stood. The room expected emotion. Tears, anger, a breakdown. What they got was silence. Iris let the silence stretch. Not for drama, for control. Then she spoke. "Your Honor," Iris said, "I'd like to introduce a document into evidence." Gideon's expression tightened. "Objection." Mara Ellison lifted the envelope. "Prenuptial agreement, Your Honor, signed by both parties 12 years ago." Judge Klein held out her hand. The document passed to her, page by page. Damien leaned back as if bored, but his fingers tapped the table. Tap, tap, tap. As Judge Klein read, the tapping stopped. Her eyes moved slower now. She reached a page and paused. A beat. Another. Then she looked up. "Mr. Cross," Judge Klein said, voice carefully controlled. "Did you sign this agreement?" Damien blinked. "Yes, but—" "And did you read it?" the judge asked. Damien's jaw tightened. It was standard. Judge Klein didn't smile. "It doesn't appear standard." Gideon stepped forward quickly. "Your Honor, whatever clause you're referring to is—" Judge Klein raised a hand. "Counsel, you may speak when I ask you." Gideon went still. A rare thing. Judge Klein looked at Iris. "Dr. Kane," she said, "explain this licensing clause." Iris breathed once, in, out, like a diver preparing for cold water. "Project Hydra is my intellectual property," Iris said. "The agreement grants Astraveron a license to use it only while we are married." Damien laughed too sharply. "That's ridiculous. Hydra is Astraveron. It's integrated into—" "Exactly," Iris said softly. The word fell like a stone. Judge Klein's gaze sharpened. "You're stating," the judge said, "that if I finalize this divorce today, Astraveron loses the right to use its core algorithm immediately." "Yes," Iris replied. Gideon's face changed. Not dramatically, but Iris, who studied language for a living, recognized it. He was recalculating. For the first time, the shark smelled something bigger than blood. Damien's confidence faltered. "What is this?" he demanded, turning toward Iris. "You can't do that." "I can," Iris said, "because I did." Celeste shifted in her seat, her posture no longer casual. Her eyes flicked toward Gideon, searching for rescue. Gideon's voice sharpened. "Your Honor, even if such a clause exists, enforcement would require verification." "Of course," Judge Klein said. "We will verify. But the clause exists." Damien's face drained of color in stages, like a screen dimming. "This is extortion," he snapped. Iris looked at him, and for the first time in 12 years, she did not soften her gaze for his comfort. "It's not extortion," Iris said. "It's consequence." Outside the courtroom, the rain kept falling. Inside, something else began to fall, too. Damien's story, his identity, his empire. Because a corporation built on a lie doesn't collapse from the outside. It collapses the moment the truth is spoken where people can't ignore it. Judge Klein ordered a temporary halt, a verification process, emergency hearings. Damien walked out of the courtroom with Gideon at his side, his expression locked in place for the cameras outside. But when the doors closed behind them and no one could see his mouth, Damien hissed, "Fix this." Gideon didn't answer immediately. His eyes were already elsewhere, on the implications, the contracts, the filings. "There may be options," Gideon said carefully. Damien's voice rose. "There are always options!" Gideon met his gaze, and in Gideon's eyes, Damien saw something he wasn't used to seeing from people paid to protect him. Doubt. Meanwhile, Iris stood in the hallway, rainlight filtering through the windows, Mara beside her. "You okay?" Mara asked quietly. Iris didn't smile, but her shoulders, for the first time in years, lowered, as if she'd put down a weight she'd forgotten she was carrying. "I'm not okay," Iris said honestly, "but I'm awake." And somewhere in Astraveron's headquarters, glass tower, corporate cleanliness, an automated system finally reached the end of its countdown. Email notifications began to chime, one after another, not loud, not dramatic, just relentless. Subject lines stacking like dominoes. Notice of license termination. Project Hydra. Compliance alert. Core systems impact urgent, service degradation risk. And the first domino fell. The market didn't care about Damien's feelings. It didn't care about his narrative. It cared about risk. And core algorithm license terminated was the kind of risk that made billion-dollar investors suddenly feel mortal. Within hours of the court's verification order, rumors leaked. They always did. Some junior legal assistant forwarded a memo to the wrong person. Some journalist's cousin worked in compliance. Some board member wanted to protect themselves by getting ahead of the story. By midday, headlines were already forming outside the courthouse. Tech Titans core IP in dispute. Divorce case threatens Astraveron. Astraveron's stock price trembled, then dropped, then kept dropping. Analysts scrambled. Commentators speculated. Competitors watched with quiet glee. And inside Astroveron's headquarters, the mood turned from confident to feral. Meetings stacked on meetings. Executives spoke in clipped voices. Legal teams ran through scenarios that all ended with the same phrase: if Hydra is pulled, we cannot, because Hydra wasn't a feature. It was infrastructure. It was the unseen skeleton holding everything upright. Without it, products failed. Contracts became unfulfilled. Service-level agreements were breached. And breach meant penalties. Penalties meant lawsuits. Lawsuits meant panic. Damien stormed through the building like anger could intimidate physics. He snapped at assistants. He demanded engineers rebuild it, as if a decade of Iris's work could be reproduced in a weekend because he wanted it. A senior engineer, one of the few who actually understood Hydra's depth, finally said what everyone else was too afraid to say. "We can't rebuild it fast," the engineer said, voice shaking. "And even if we could, we'd be copying her IP. That's litigation suicide." Damien's eyes flared. "So what do you suggest?" The engineer swallowed. "We negotiate with Dr. Kane." Damien recoiled as if the suggestion smelled bad. Negotiate. With the woman he'd called a trophy. The woman he'd tried to evict. The woman he'd planned to erase. His pride rose like a wall. "No," Damien said. "She'll fold. She'll want money. Everyone wants money." But Iris didn't want Damien's money. She wanted something Damien couldn't imagine wanting. Truth, and control over her own creation. While Astroveron burned, the court verification process moved. Judge Klein demanded documentation. Mara Ellison submitted evidence. Time-stamped code commits from early repositories. Academic drafts that matched later corporate implementations. Emails from Damien to Iris from years ago, praising your model and your engine. Even a recorded presentation where Damien, drunk with early success, had toasted Iris in front of a small team. "To Iris," he'd said, smiling into a cheap camera, "for building the brain of this company." Damien tried to claim he'd been being supportive, but the evidence wasn't language. It was architecture, and it all pointed back to Iris. Meanwhile, Gideon Blackwood attempted damage control. He filed motions, argued technicalities, tried to create enough fog that the court would hesitate. But Judge Klein wasn't interested in fog. She was interested in clarity, and the clearer the truth became, the uglier Gideon's earlier strategy looked. Because Gideon had built his case on a premise, Iris had no direct contribution. That premise was now visibly false. Celeste made it worse. She took the stand in a subsequent hearing and claimed Iris never participated in Hydra's development. But then, Mara Ellison introduced internal memos signed by Celeste herself. Memos referencing Dr. Kane's constraints, Kane's approval, Iris's ethical protocols. Celeste's face tightened as the words appeared on a screen. Mara's voice stayed calm. "Ms. Devereaux," Mara said, "did you write this memo?" Celeste swallowed. "Yes." "And did you send it to the executive team?" "Yes." "So Dr. Kane was involved," Mara said. "Correct?" Celeste hesitated. That hesitation was a crack, and cracks in court become fractures. Celeste forced a smile. "In an advisory capacity." Mara nodded slowly. "So your earlier statement that she never participated was—" Celeste's eyes flickered toward Gideon. Gideon's gaze didn't help her. The judge leaned forward. "Answer the question, Ms. Devereaux." Celeste's voice went thin. "It was imprecise." Judge Klein's expression hardened. "Imprecise," she repeated. "Or untrue?" Celeste didn't answer quickly enough, and that was enough. Perjury wasn't a dramatic word. It was a legal one. And it changed the temperature of the room. By the end of the week, Astroveron's stock had lost nearly everything. Not metaphorically. Numbers on screens bled red, 98%. A $14 billion empire collapsing into scraps. Astroveron's board convened an emergency meeting. The boardroom was all glass and cold light. Damien stood at the head of the table trying to look like a leader, but the people around him weren't fans anymore. They were survivors. A board member, a woman with steel gray hair and a voice like a gavel, spoke first. "You told us Hydra was company-owned," she said. Damien's smile was strained. "It is. It's integrated. It is licensed," another board member cut in. "Licensed through your marriage." Damien's voice tightened. "This is a personal matter being weaponized." The gray-haired woman didn't blink. "This is a corporate existential risk," she said, "and it exists because you built this company on a lie." Damien's nostrils flared. "That's not—" "It is," she said. "And now investors are suing. Partners are terminating contracts. We're hemorrhaging." Damien leaned forward, palms on the table. "Give me time. I can fix this." A man at the far end, quiet until now, spoke with the calm cruelty of someone who had already decided. "We don't have time," he said, "and you don't have credibility." Damien stared. Then, like a knife sliding in, the final words arrived. "The board votes to remove you as CEO, effective immediately." For a moment, Damien didn't understand the sentence, as if the language didn't parse, as if Hydra itself would have to interpret it for him. "What?" Damien whispered. The gray-haired woman slid a folder across the table. "Security will escort you out," she said. "Your access is revoked." Damien's chest rose and fell too fast. "You can't do this," he said, voice cracking at the edges. They could, and they did. Damien Cross walked out of the building he'd called his kingdom and felt, for the first time, what it meant to be alone without an audience. The city was wet, reflective, unforgiving. He hailed a rideshare. His card declined. He tried another. Declined. He stood on the sidewalk in rain that no longer felt cinematic. It felt cold, real. He walked. Later, in a restaurant that used to greet him by name, Damien sat at a table and ordered a lunch he couldn't afford because ordering cheap felt like admitting defeat. When the check came, he smiled at the waiter like it was nothing. He inserted his card. The little machine beeped. Declined. Damien's smile stiffened. He tried again. Declined. The waiter's eyes shifted. Subtle judgment, subtle pity. Damien's face burned. People at nearby tables pretended not to look. Pretending was its own form of looking. Damien fumbled in his wallet. Cash. Not enough. He heard himself say, quietly, "Can you give me a moment?" The waiter stepped back, polite but firm. Damien stared at the water glass on the table. Clear, ordinary. Something he'd never noticed when life was full of expensive things. Rain ran down the window outside. Tap, tap, tap. And in that rhythm, Damien finally heard what Iris had been hearing for years. The sound of consequences arriving. Iris didn't celebrate. Not with champagne, not with speeches, not with the kind of victory lap Damien would have taken. Because Iris wasn't drunk on applause. She was sober on reality. When the court finalized the divorce, after verification, after hearings, after Judge Klein's careful documentation, the license termination became more than a clause. It became a fact. Astroveron, stripped of Hydra, began selling pieces of itself to survive. Buildings, equipment, non-core subsidiaries, anything that could become cash. And Iris watched it all with a strange calm. Not because she enjoyed destruction, but because she understood this wasn't her destroying anything. This was a structure built on theft, finally losing its foundation. Mara Ellison met Iris in a small office one evening, rain still tracing lines down the window. "It's done," Mara said. "Legally, it's yours. Fully." Iris nodded. Mara hesitated. "How do you feel?" Iris looked down at her hands. the same hands that wrote the first line of Hydra's code, the same hands Damien once held like a prop for the cameras. "I feel," Iris said slowly, "like I can breathe without asking permission." In the months that followed, Iris moved quietly. No interviews, no headline hunting. She registered a new company, Hydra Applied Research. Not glamorous. Not designed for a magazine cover. Designed for work. She hired carefully. Engineers who cared about ethics. Researchers who valued transparency. Operations people who respected boundaries. Some came from Astraveron, drawn not by revenge, but by the relief of finally working for the true creator. Iris negotiated to acquire assets from Astraveron's liquidation, lab equipment, data infrastructure, only what she could legally own. Office space, all at prices that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. In one particularly quiet moment, Iris walked through a lab she'd just purchased. The lights were off. The room smelled of plastic and dust and possibility. She stood in the doorway and listened. Not to voices, to silence. A clean silence that didn't feel empty. It felt open. Then an email chime echoed from her laptop. Crisp, cheerful. The same sound that had haunted Astraveron during its collapse. But this time, the subject line didn't carry panic. It carried purpose. Field partnership request. Earthquake. Early warning model. Iris stared at the screen. Earthquake prediction wasn't fortune-telling, not in the magical way people wanted. But Hydra's strength, context, pattern recognition, adaptive interpretation, could help integrate seismic data streams, interpret anomalies, find signals that human analysts might miss. Hydra could help build early warning systems. Minutes of warning could save lives. That had always been Iris's dream. Not fame, not money. Impact. She accepted the request. Then another, and another. In time, Hydra Applied Research became known, not as a fallen billionaire's revenge story, but as a company doing something quietly profound. A company that didn't need a charismatic founder to be respected, because its respect came from results. As for Celeste Devereaux, the court process didn't forget her imprecision. Investigations followed. Statements were compared. Emails subpoenaed. Her testimony, carefully coached, became a trap she'd stepped into willingly. Charges didn't arrive like a movie climax. They arrived like paperwork, cold and unavoidable. And Gideon Blackwood? He continued practicing law because men like him rarely lose everything, but his reputation took a hit. Whispers followed him. He didn't read the prenup. He didn't see the trap. He underestimated the quiet woman. In legal circles, that kind of whisper was a scar. Damien Cross tried to resurface. He appeared on a podcast once, voice hoarse, claiming he'd been betrayed. He implied Iris was vindictive. He tried to reclaim the hero narrative. But the world had moved on. A hero without a crown is just a man. And Damien, stripped of Hydra and stripped of Astraveron, was left with what he'd always feared most: ordinariness. One rainy afternoon, nearly a year after the divorce, Damien stood outside a building where Hydra Applied Research now operated. He watched employees come and go. He watched them laugh in small groups, holding coffee cups, wearing no suits, no armor. He watched Iris through a second-floor window, standing in a lab, speaking to a team while a screen behind her displayed complex models. She didn't look like a trophy. She looked like a creator. Damien's throat tightened. For the first time, something like regret tried to form in him. But regret required humility, and Damien had never practiced it long enough to make it real. He turned away. The rain fell steadily. Tap, tap, tap. Inside the building, Iris paused mid-conversation. She glanced at the window, not because she sensed Damien, but because she always noticed the rain. It had been with her through everything, through the nights of building Hydra, through the years of being silenced, through the courtroom, through the collapse. Rain didn't pick sides. It simply arrived. And now, Iris understood something she hadn't understood when she was younger. You don't need the world's permission to own what you build. You just need the courage to stop letting someone else tell your story. Iris turned back to her team. "Run the model again," she said, voice steady, "and cross-check the anomaly window with the last 2 years of data." An engineer nodded. "On it." A young researcher asked, "Dr. Kane, do you ever regret—" Iris's eyes softened, but her voice didn't weaken. "I regret trusting someone who needed to be a hero more than he needed to be honest," she said. "But I don't regret building Hydra." She looked at the screen. Patterns, numbers, language turned into warning. "And I don't regret leaving," she added quietly. Outside, rain continued its patient rhythm. Inside, the future continued too. Not loud, not flashy, just real. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment. Just a word is enough. Because sometimes the quietest people carry the biggest engines. And if you've ever been underestimated, you're not alone.